Good morning, everyone. So it should come as no surprise after the elections that we are hearing a lot about the federal immigration policies and how that is going to implicate the state of Connecticut. The House Republicans, one of our proposals is trying to address the Trust Act. We have seen over the course of a number of years the impact that not just illegal immigrant crimes have had on the state of Connecticut, but crimes in general. And part of that is that the Democrats have made a lot of changes to our criminal laws and our justice system that really empowers and emboldens the criminal element in the state of Connecticut. Our Attorney General has now doubled down and wants to extend the gag order that is placed on our police officers and probation officers from communicating with federal officials. He wants to extend that to the Department of Corrections so that when there's situations where we want to be protecting our residents from criminal element, the very people that are in charge of that will be prohibited from doing so. And so our purpose today is going to talk about our proposals on how to make Connecticut more safe. And I'm going to start out by turning it over to Representative Fishbein, who's ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, to talk about how we got here.
Thank you, Vinny. Good morning. Current state law prevents municipalities from collaborating with ICE unless there's a criminal conviction for an A, B felony or a terrorism charge. And there must be a formal ICE detainer and a judicial warrant on file. Even then, due to municipal ordinances, many departments cannot hold an illegal immigrant to comply with the federal detainer request. How did we get here? Under federal law, when ICE issues a civil immigration detainer to another law enforcement agency, it informs that agency of its intent to assume custody of an individual in the agency's custody and requests that the agency advise ICE before releasing the person. This process allows ICE some time to process their paperwork. In 2013, the legislature enacted an act concerning civil immigration detainers, colloquially known as the Trust Act. Viewed at the time as a reasonable approach, the original Trust Act passed both houses unanimously. It created new procedures for state and local law enforcement to follow when they received a civil immigration detainer. Under that legislation, state and local law enforcement officers are required to release an individual subject to a civil immigration detainer unless they determine the person presents one of 7 public safety risk factors. This is the 2013 law. That they had a felony conviction, they had pending criminal charges, an outstanding warrant, they were a known gang member, a possible match as a suspected terrorist, is subject to a federal final order of deportation or removal, or if the officer determines the person presents an inaccessible risk to public safety. Should any of those factors present themselves, law enforcement was required to immediately notify ICE of their determination to detain, and ICE would do their process. And if they did not come and retrieve the individual within 48 hours, the person was to be released. But that all changed in 2019. Legislative Democrats that year proposed to make Connecticut the 11th sanctuary city in this country. Their bill passed the Senate, but it ran into opposition in the House. And there was negotiations, and the most egregious portions were taken out of the bill, and 2 bills were combined. When combined, the Trust Act as it exists today expanded into 6 areas. It expanded the definition of law enforcement to include bail commissioners, probation officers, school and university police and security departments. It eliminated 5 of those public safety exceptions that I talked about before, and basically brought it down to a conviction for an A or B felony, as well as being matched with the terrorism screening database. Except in narrow circumstances, it eliminated law enforcement's ability to utilize any resources to communicate with ICE or the Department of Homeland Security about the custody status of the person. It prohibited law enforcement from giving ICE access to interview a person unless there was an active detainer warrant. It required the head of a law enforcement agency to review and approve any response to a federal request for notification about the release date and the time of the person in custody. It required law enforcement to provide a copy of the civil litigation detainer and justification for compliance with such person's attorney, or if there was no attorney, to someone else. In 2019, those changes made Connecticut less safe. Rep. Howard will give you examples as to how we are trying to address this, or particular instances that we're trying to address through our proposal. So I turn it over to Representative Howard.
Good morning, everybody. You know, Craig in a minute is going to go over our proposal, but I think it's important to say something from the beginning. Our proposal does not create a situation where state and local law enforcement in Connecticut become an arm of ICE to go out and round up people here that are here illegally who are committing no other crimes. That is not what we are proposing. However, we can serve to assist our federal partners in their scarce resources by getting the most dangerous people out of our communities. That is what our focus is, and the current Trust Act prevents that from happening. For example, the timing of this. Just 3 weeks ago, in a parole hearing, an individual sat before the parole board. Now, this is an individual who has prior convictions for sex-related offenses, has been on the sex offender registry, and in 2021 was convicted of sex assault of a minor again. He was given what I believe is an abysmal 5-year sentence. 3.5 years later, he's before the parole board, and he says, I'm not going to promise you I'm not going to do this again. I'll do my best to not drink and be around those situations, but I'm not going to promise you. And I watched that hearing, and the parole board members sat there and they worked together to make sure that they got this individual out who has a detainer for deportation, got him out to make sure he could avoid that deportation. Literally took steps to put a multi-time convicted sex offender back on our streets when the federal government wants to deport him to the country that he came from. To me, that should shock the conscience of every single person in the state of Connecticut. I have sons, I have nieces, I have nephews. Anybody who's been around me for a while knows the care and concern I have for children. And to see state employees or appointees doing what they can to keep somebody from being deported who is a multi-time sex offender is atrocious. If you look at the ICE website, even because a lot of is talk about the new administration. So this comes from the ICE that was under former President Biden. Detainers are critical public safety tools because they focus enforcement resources on removable non-citizens who have been arrested for criminal activity. Our proposal is even more specific, horrific fines. Detainers increase the safety of all parties involved because enforcement and removal personnel, law enforcement officials, and the non-citizens themselves, because they allow ICE, who are going to deport these individuals, to get them under a controlled environment instead of having to go out into our streets, and the possibility for the outcomes of that are detrimental not only to the individual, to law enforcement officers, but all the people around. So we'll look back again. I gave you one example. We go back to more recently. A Peruvian court has found this individual, Irving Gustavo Escate Haranca, guilty of aggravated robbery and sentenced him to 11 years. Border Patrol arrested him coming into the country illegally in December of 2023. He was released on his own recognizance. And then the Hartford Police Department arrested him in March of 2024 for felony assault, felony crime of violence. They lodged an immigration detainer against him, the federal government did, and yet the Connecticut Department of Corrections ignored the immigration detainer, released him from custody without notifying ICE or ERO. He was again summoned by New Britain for motor vehicle offenses before ERO's Boston office finally arrested him in Hartford. Again, that was under President Biden. Okay, so this notion of the change in administration causing widespread concern that we now have to take steps to make sure that we keep violent criminal offenders in Connecticut is not anything that I support. And in fact, I think I have my own opinions of what should happen to child sex offenders, which isn't appropriate for this podium. It would make deportation look like a tropical holiday. But our proposal is reasonable. And it basically says, and Rep. Fishbein will lay it out for you, But our position is quite clear. Individuals who are in this country illegally, committing felony crimes of violence, our local and state law enforcement ought to be cooperating with ICE, who want to detain and export those people for the safety not only of the residents of Connecticut who are here legally, but let's not lose track of the fact that the immigrants that are here illegally, committing no other crimes, trying to make a better life for themselves and their family, are often the victims of these very people. So if you care about immigrants who are here trying to make a better life, why on earth would you be a party to trying to keep violent offenders right in their community to continue to commit violent felonies, especially against children? There's more cases. I'm not going to bore you with them all. And I'm happy to take your questions after. But, you know, I'm the ranking member of the Public Safety and Security Committee. I've been a policeman for 23 years. The safety of people in this state is my primary concern here. And what you're about to hear our rollout is reasonable, it's appropriate, and there's no reason why a reasonable mind should oppose what you're about to hear. Thank you.
So this session, there's a lot of proposals on both sides of the aisle having to do with the Trust Act. They range from repealing the 2019 changes to expanding the restrictions on communications between law enforcement and ICE. Our proposal removes those barriers for law enforcement, and now the arrest and not the conviction would be the trigger. We would extend this to an arrest for an A, B, or C felony, as well as a crime of domestic violence. Under our proposal, no longer will police need an ICE detainer and a judicial warrant to keep our streets safe from illegal immigrants who choose to commit heinous crimes. We believe that looking at where we are, looking at where we've been, the time for experimenting with the safety of Connecticut's residents is over. We need to move forward to protect the citizens that we were elected to represent up here in Hartford. So I turn it over to Representative Candelora, who wanted to address some other stuff. So thank you.
So as you heard, that is certainly our proposal. I think, you know, one of the issues with criminal aliens is their ability to flee. And with a state that has a bail system that allows violent criminals back out into the street, it poses not just a problem for the state of Connecticut, but also for the entire nation as these immigrants move around the country. And we saw that issue arise with the murder of Lake and Riley. And we saw at the federal level that act was passed, I think, both by the House and Senate on a bipartisan basis. And we want to join that chorus of bipartisanship to try to make our state safer with this proposal. You know, additionally, we're hearing about the healthcare issues with our immigrant population. There's proposals out there to raise the age for healthcare for immigrants to the age of 26. That is an issue that we also are proposing to look at what is the cost to the state of Connecticut. We've continually asked the Department of Social Services how much the current policy costs the state of Connecticut. We cannot get those numbers. It's a moving target. It's been anywhere from 30 million to 150 million. And so before we step into this arena of added cost to our healthcare system, we're also proposing that we require these agencies to start reporting back to us of what the cost of these policies for healthcare for immigrants are. So I think these two proposals are very reasonable, and we hope that they are taken up by the General Assembly this year. And we would be, we're also joined by Senator Sampson, who will work with us in the Senate to get these over the finish line, I would hope. And we're here to answer any questions if you have any.
Can you please explain what would happen in those 48 hours? You've mentioned some pretty unfortunate situations. So if you're going to hold someone who's been accused of a crime for 48 hours without a warrant, what happens in that 48 hours? Do you want them released, or you can hold them indefinitely, or what is the purpose of that?
So that is up to ICE. So the trigger is ICE is contacted to be known that law enforcement has this individual, and they have a 40-hour, the clock starts to run then. So, as the law already says, if they don't come and take the person within the 48 hours, the person is released.
And what is the criteria? I heard at the beginning you mentioned there are specific felony charges, but this seems pretty broad of what this someone who's already been arraigned or simply is suspected of something bad?
No, the trigger would be an arrest. Merely being questioned, by a law enforcement in the course of investigation would not trigger this under our language. And it's really not broad, so to speak, in that the current law extends to a conviction for an A or B felony. So that's already there, right? That subset's already there. We're shifting it to arrest of that same subset. We're adding the C felonies. So it's really doesn't broaden it that much.
Is this, well, can we get the bill number? I forgot to look at it.
The bill is in the system. It hasn't been released yet.
Oh, it hasn't been released
Yeah.
yet? Okay. So I thought there was a House bill out there, no?
There is, that was,
Oh, this
that
gonna
is,
supersede it.
Yeah, there's a number of
Yeah,
bills that
yeah,
our caucus
yeah.
put in.
So basically, are you talking about sort of repealing the 2019 revisions and making some additional changes? Or how would you describe your legislation?
it's sort of in the middle of the road. It doesn't, because the original proposal, and there's other proposals out there that repeal 2019. This does not do that. This, we'll say, expands 2019, but doesn't go as far as 2013.
Okay. And I'd like to, if I could ask Representative Sampson, you've got legislation, and I believe some House co-sponsors on it, that's a little different from this one. Could you explain what you want to see done in terms of changes to the trust act?
Yeah, hey, Paul, thanks for the question, and I just want to say that I'm delighted to join my old House Republican colleagues in their efforts to, start a conversation on this topic. I don't want to step on their press conference by talking about other proposals. Certainly, some of us would want to address legal immigration in other ways, particularly the ways that are enticing more illegal immigration in the state, driver's licenses, healthcare, and so forth. I mean, I think it's an overall conversation that needs to happen. I think that it's been brought into the forefront. Trump's election, I think, in many ways was a referendum on a lot of issues, including illegal immigration. And I think in Connecticut, I think you'll find polling data would suggest that the vast majority of Connecticut residents have a problem with illegal immigration. And this issue is not just about illegal immigration. It is about the next step, which is, Connecticut Democrats have made it clear that they are willing to protect criminals, and we can list a number of bills that are very clear on that forefront. And they're also willing to protect undocumented aliens entering our state. But this issue is about them protecting undocumented aliens that also happen to be criminals. And I think that is a bridge too far for most people, and I think that's why we're standing here today, because it's about time we addressed it.
Where do you think that the state is heading? I mean, we went through this once before with the Trump administration. I think basically $6.4 million in law enforcement grants were withheld and then restored under the Biden administration. We just had earlier this week the memo from the Justice Department about investigating state and local officials who interfere with the administration's enforcement efforts. So where do you see Connecticut and this second Trump administration heading?
Well, look, I mean, if you see what the Attorney General just put out, is that 2019 Trust Act expanded the gag order to protect criminals. He wants to go even further now and extend it to Department of Corrections. So they now, too, would be under a gag order. So that would say that an illegal immigrant who is a criminal throughout the entire process of being in the criminal pipeline is going to have state protection and is not going to be working with the federal government in order to get these violent criminals deported. And so they're going in the opposite direction, I think, where we need to be.
Can I just say something else on top of that, which is the potential loss of a small amount of federal funds in no way makes up for the financial impact that illegal immigration already has on the state of Connecticut. Some people say it's more than $1 billion a year when you can count education and a bunch of other things. And the human cost, Paul, I mean, that's the real issue here. We're talking about crimes that would never have been committed. There are victims out there, real live victims, as a result of these policies.
I understand that, but my question was, where do you see the confrontation between the state and federal governments over this issue? I mean, it was just.
Well, I think, right.
Now people might face federal investigation. Maybe it'll be more federal money, maybe it'll be Medicaid money.
It could be, but what we're dealing with right now is we are trying to not even addressing the federal issue. We're trying to keep Connecticut safe. And Democrats are doubling down and going in the opposite direction, as you're hearing.
So currently, the system, as I understand it, is the fingerprint information, if somebody's arrested, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor, is sent to the federal government. ICE receives that through the FBI. So the communication is there. I'm not understanding the lack of communication.
It's not there. If you look at our statutes, our law enforcement and probation and judicial, they're all prohibited from communicating with ICE. So if they have an individual in their custody and that fingerprint goes into the system and they've committed rape, and ICE calls Hartford and says, do you have this person in your custody? They're not allowed to answer that question. So that's the issue of how extreme we've gotten in this state.
But can't ICE see that online?
They can see it, but they can't get access to the person. I mean, we just saw what happened a month ago. Yeah, but let's listen to the conversation we're having right now. This is a violent criminal in state custody where the federal government has no ability to communicate with a state agency that's there to protect its citizens and effectuate a removal from that person from our country.
I understand. I'm just asking, the federal government is aware that that person is...
They may be aware, but they may not, because there's a prohibition for the state of Connecticut to communicate with our federal government. It's bizarre.
So, can I just address that a little bit? Not everybody is in APHIS. So, not everybody is in APHIS. APHIS is the fingerprint system, right? So, somebody comes over the border from a different country and they murder someone, right? Let's say they get arrested. They get fingerprinted. The prints go to the feds. They're not in the system. So, that's a major part of this, that not everybody, just because, you can't assume that just because somebody's prints get taken, that they're in the system. You know, I also just want to say that we are the United States of America. We come together, 50 states, under the U.S. Constitution. We all take an oath to the U.S. and the state Constitution. And for any elected official to say and to promulgate anything that says do not cooperate with the feds, I think it's a breach of their oath. How could you possibly?
Sorry, just
Yeah.
one point. Your reform specifies A, B, and C felonies. So anything under that, they would not be cooperating still, right?
This would be a mandate, so,
But
yeah,
a D felony.
would not apply. That is correct.
So what's the difference?
What this is going to do, the difference is that this is mandating cooperation. It's not mandating to not cooperate. And that's the difference.
But why draw the line at C then?
Well, we would hope that law enforcement would always be able to communicate with our federal government in order to, effectuate public safety concerns. And frankly, if we were in charge, we would be eliminating and repealing these 2019 reforms. But the problem is we're not. So this is where we are landing right now. But we think on an expansive level, nobody should be protected from communication with the federal government when crimes are committed. There should be open communication. But this is a recognition that we know our Democrat colleagues won't go this far, and so we're only putting these felonies on the table. You know, juxtaposing what our Attorney General is proposing, and that is to double down and expand this act even further.
Representative Fishbein, you referred to Connecticut as a sanctuary state. Attorney General Tong has said we are not. New Haven has referred to themselves as a welcoming city. Obviously, there's no definitions for these. How would you define what a sanctuary state is?
We could replace that with an unconstitutional state. But sanctuary state, I mean, it says to one that it is welcoming. It is a public relations term. I don't believe there's any term of art that has to do, but the fact of the matter is it's in violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, I think what we could call Connecticut is we are a sanctuary state for criminal aliens. That's clear. I think the Attorney General would agree on that, and he is doubling down to make sure there is no question that we are going to protect criminal aliens in Connecticut.
Senator Sampson mentioned the election. Vinny, I'm curious, do you feel you have an electoral mandate to do this right now? I mean, you're coming up here a few seats short. Rob and Heather, you guys are a seat short. Do you feel like voters spoke to Connecticut lawmakers, to you all, and said, do you have a mandate to do this?
Since I've been in office, illegal immigration has been a concern for all residents, and I think what has happened is people don't realize how extreme this state has gotten. But I think that conversation is starting to occur. just what has happened over the last 2 weeks. It's unfortunate. Daily Wire, I think, was the only news that reported on this pedophile immigrant being released from custody just for the sole purpose of protecting him from deportation. As those stories are getting out through social media, people are horrified and they're realizing we've got to do something in this state. So, maybe it's not an overt mandate, but I have no question that there is a silent majority out there, vast majority, that are really concerned about public safety in the state of Connecticut.
Do you have any sense with these changes, obviously going from what was currently there to what you're proposing, do you have any sense of the size of the population that would be affected by that? Meaning, right now there's X number of people who are subject to the state's laws where they're allowed to contact federal authorities. You are proposing Y number be part of that now. Do you have any sense of what the delta between the two is? How many, are we talking about thousands of cases here where there would be locals that,
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think we're talking about, a couple hundred people possibly throughout the state of Connecticut. This is not a policy that is going to widespread impact everybody in a state of 3.5 million. We're probably talking about a couple hundred.
So for something like this doesn't obviously include misdemeanors, right? So if this law was enacted and police arrested somebody on misdemeanors, the Trump administration has said that they would want to punish local officials who don't comply with federal immigration law. So if Trump decides that they want to pick up somebody who committed a misdemeanor and local officials don't comply with that, do you think those local officials should be arrested?
I think it all comes down to it all depends on what the federal law looks like. But I will say globally as a state, we have held our police officers responsible for their actions when they break the law. We have stripped them of qualified immunity. If any public official is going to actively engage on breaking the law, whether it's federal or state, they should be held accountable to that, just like we hold everybody else accountable for the jobs that they do.
But what if the state law says
But-
one thing and the Trump administration is saying another?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a hypothetical that we'll have to have that conversation when we get there. I think we've seen that with our marijuana laws. I mean, we're flying in the face of federal law. I think that's unconstitutional. I don't think we should be doing it. But if people are going to harbor criminals, if the federal government says ICE has a deportation order for all crimes, including misdemeanors, then the state of Connecticut should be abiding by that law. And if there's consequences where individuals could be punished for not complying with that federal law, so be it. I would support that.
Can I just very clearly, I think what Representative Candelora is trying to say is that very clearly our position is that our state should be having the same laws as the federal government and enforcing them in the same way so that we don't have that type of problem. You mentioned misdemeanors, which I think is very interesting. I mean, you guys are asking a lot of questions about the details and the interaction of state and feds. We're here for one singular purpose, which is to point out that this policy that was passed in 2019 and even in, I would say 2013, the original Trust Act, has led to crime in our state, and it has led to people being victimized that would never have been otherwise. That's what has happened, and we want to call attention to that. We want to point out that that happened on a partisan basis. Those were party line votes back in 2019 that made that happen. In addition, you mentioned misdemeanors. Just to illustrate the willingness of Connecticut Democrats to protect criminals. In 2021, in another bill where they were erasing criminal records, they included a provision in there to reduce the penalty for a Class A misdemeanor, a one-year misdemeanor, to change it from 365 days, which is 1 year, to 364 days. And you scratch your head and you ask yourself, why would anybody do that? Until you realize that there's one singular purpose, and that is the threshold by which the federal government determines that that's a detainable offense for an illegal alien is 1 year. So they were purposely writing policy to protect people that committed one-year misdemeanors. What kind of policy is that? And the question about whether or not this is popular in Connecticut, I defy you to grab anybody on the street, regardless of party affiliation, ask them if we should be protecting criminal aliens, even people that commit Class A misdemeanors, let alone felonies.
So you're ultimately saying that because of this gag order that people are falling through the cracks?
Yeah, no,
Not being held.
they're not just falling through the cracks, they're actively being protected by our government.
Congress just passed the Lincoln Riley Act, though it's going to the president, it includes things like shoplifting, which would be considered violent crimes. So if that gets through, do you feel like Connecticut should comply with what Congress is passing, which would certainly be a broader standard than even this proposal?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think we have an obligation to follow our federal laws. And so to the extent that states have rights to do things on their own, we certainly should, but we need to be following what happens at the federal level. I mean, I think here in Connecticut, we are completely out of step. And my concern is that we are going to become a state that is going to be harboring and protecting criminals with the direction that we've gone in with this Trust Act. It has gone too far.
One question for Representative Howard.
Yes, sir.
If a police officer arrested someone who was here illegally,
Mm-hmm.
they knew there was an ICE detainer, and they decided on their own to contact ICE, their own official channel, how does that work? Does that happen? How does that work? And what is the penalty if you?
I don't think that does happen. I think that police officer would be putting himself in a precarious situation because the Trust Act here prohibits him from doing that. You know, and that's one of the biggest problems, right? When you look at law enforcement as a whole, and that includes DOC, probation, parole, the court system. I've been a policeman for 23 years. When a police officer from another state, from another municipality, from the federal government calls me because they're working on an investigation that they're doing, I need to have unfettered ability to communicate with them. That's how we solve crime. Believe it or not, criminals actually don't stay in one town all the time. They move around. The ability for us to communicate with each other is how we get most crime solved. And in fact, DESP, just this year, came to the Public Safety Committee with a proposal that mandates municipalities participate in a system called E-Trace so that we have interoperability and communication. DESP recognizes that interoperability and communication leads to better outcomes. Why on earth would we have a law in Connecticut that says our law enforcement personnel are gag ordered? You can't communicate with our law enforcement personnel if we don't agree with the policies of the Colorado administration. It's terrible. It's a horrific idea. And Susan, I just want to say to your earlier question, we hold people here when they're charged by one municipality or one agency for another all the time. If I have a domestic homicide in Stonington and Norwich grabs the suspect on operating under suspension, where they would normally get a summons, they're going to grab him, bring him into custody, and hold him for a reasonable amount of time until I can get an arrest warrant secured. That's what we do all the time in this state. Because police officers in this state, unlike people in this building, are focused on safe communities. Taking people who want to hurt other people and putting them in jail so that they can't. Or in this case, if they're here illegally and they're here to hurt other people, send them back to where they came from, and they shouldn't be here. That's it. Nobody's talking about the average person who came here illegally, is working in our industries, not bothering anybody else, rounding them up. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody up here is talking about that today. And why are we starting at C felonies? I think it's a great question. And the answer is because we're trying to come with something that we can try to get done in this building given the numbers that we have. You have a legislature here today with record fatalities on our highways, literally with a law in the books that tells our police officers if you see somebody smoking marijuana and driving, you can't pull them over for it. That's what we're working with. So would I like to say, yeah, if you commit 17 burglaries, all Class D felonies, that we should be able to tell ICE about it so they can get you on deportation detainer and get you out? Yes. But I've walked in this building every day for 4 years. That's not going to fly given the numbers that we have here. That's why. It's not that we don't think it. It's that we're trying to give the other side of the aisle, the overwhelming majority, something to say, look, we're trying to do our best. Give us something to help protect our people.
Greg, one of the things we hear from the Democrats on this is they say, look, we don't need to be, the Attorney General said this, we don't need to be turning a local police agencies into basically a federal deportation force. And part of that argument is they're saying it's a resource drain. In practice, how does it, is this just a phone call to ICE to say, hey, we got this guy here? Or is there an added burden on these law enforcement officers?
Mike, I hate to say this to you, but that, I try to do the best when I'm at this podium, but that is a ridiculous statement from him. Absolutely absurd. There's not a police officer or a police agency in this state that has the time nor the inclination to go running around checking on people's immigration status to round them up for ICE. That is not happening. Democrats like to say that because they want to scare everybody and get the distraction away from them putting the guy like they did 3 weeks ago, the same guy that this legislature approved to be on the Board of Pardons and Parole after he let 43 murderers out of jail, and now he's doing this. They want to distract away from that. That is not what police officers in this state want to do. That is not what the legislators here want. We want our law enforcement officers to take and do their job, which is enforce the state laws that we agree on here in this building. and then help be a partner to our federal agency. Hey, we've arrested this individual for violent felonies. Let us help you triage with your scarce resources the people you should be targeting. Not the ones that are just here working, trying to make a better life. The ones that are raping kids. I take offense to that. I understand I'm a minority here. I get it. But that offends me. It really makes me angry. Multi-time offender, put him right back out again. Absurd. Absolutely disgusting. So no, that is not what law enforcement is looking to do.
In practice, though, it's a phone call and some paperwork. What are we talking about?
Yes, it should be. The practice ought to be this. You've arrested somebody. Normal booking process. Where were you born? New York City. Okay. You have a social security number. Bingo, bango. Police officers booking somebody. Where were you born? Some other country. You have a social security number. No, sir, I'm here illegally. Okay. We're going to notify ICE. Hey, you have somebody here illegally. They've admitted they're here illegally, and we just pinched them on a sex 2. Or we just pinched them on an assault 2 or an assault 1. A home invasion. The litany of crimes that I have that are going on here in the state of Connecticut by illegal immigrants. Not all illegal immigrants. Nobody's talking about them. We're talking about the ones that come here to victimize people. You notify ICE, get the detainer on them, and furthermore, why should we put it on the backs of Connecticut residents to house these individuals in our incarceration facilities throughout the state when ICE wants to get them out of the country and off the financial backs of the people in the state? Safer communities, better fiscal outcome.
The Trump administration has many people afraid in the immigrant community, and something like this might make them even more afraid to even approach police, regardless of whether they commit.
Okay, let me say this even more clear, okay, since I know that this is how this is going to play out. We are not here. If a woman calls the police and says, my husband's beating me up, and the police show up and she says, I'm here illegally, we don't want the police to take any action with ICE. Or at least I don't. Our proposal doesn't. Because we want those people, victims, witnesses, to feel comfortable with the police department. But if people who come to Connecticut or the United States, but here Connecticut, and they're here illegally, and they're afraid to commit crimes because they might be deported, good. Be afraid to commit crimes. Stop it. Or do it and get out. It's that simple. You guys can write what you want, and I understand all that. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody wants the police officers in this state to round up victims, witnesses, just because they're here illegally, who committed no other crime. And I understand their presence here as an illegal immigrant is a crime. I get that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about C felonies and above, specifically.
That's the sharing of information.
Of course it does, which is a problem. And it's unsafe. It's a detriment to law enforcement, completely.
And in that time period of 48 hours, if they find that they're mentioning.
It's a deportable offense. They can put a detainer on, and we ought to cooperate with our federal partners to hold that person on that detainer so when ICE comes to get them, they can get them in a controlled environment for the safety of law enforcement professionals, the safety of the detainee, and the safety of the community. That's what should happen.
I think we're done. Yeah?